Hi guys, it's Serge, and in this SQL injection union attack, we are going to determine the number of columns returned by the query. We are going to use the order by and union select techniques to determine the number of columns and append some extra data to the database results. Let's access the lab. We are presented with a shopping page and we see a bunch of products with their corresponding prices and the details here. And we can refine our search to select a bunch of categories and find out which products belong to that category. And this makes sense because if we look at the URL path and parameters, we see that we specify a category and its corresponding value. And you would call this the get key and this the get value. And what happens here is it changes every time we select something else, and we can even try to specify our own categories, and we see that shirts does not have any products in there, and pants does. Alright, makes sense. And before jumping straight into the lab and completing it, I want to show you guys what's happening here. So I've created a little demonstration in PHP of what could happen. And normally you would see something like getting the variable from the get key in the HTML in the HTTP URL, and you will use that to construct an SQL statement where you select a bunch of data from the database, from the products table where this is true. So this is a where clause, and this is essentially the whole filtering aspect. So here we can create where category equals the category supplied by the user in the URL. And then we will execute the statement, fetch the results, and return it to the user. In this program, I will just get it from the command line instead of from the URL because it's easier to showcase. So if we go to gifts, and this is what the SQL statement would look like, the SQL query, and it's a valid statement. And let's try to specify gifts and put an apostrophe at the end. So there are now 2 apostrophes, and this will result in an invalid SQL query. And let's see what happens if we go to pets or gifts and use that apostrophe, and you will see that it results in an internal server error because this is not a valid statement and the database does not accept it, and it results in an error. So what we can try to do is create a filter that is actually not a filter at all by applying some simple logic and creating something that's always true. So this part actually limits the amount of products that you select. Now let's try to select all the products by creating a query that looks like this, or 1 equals 1. And I am not finishing the last apostrophe because it is already included here. So I've closed this one and now it's appended the last one. And this is a valid statement, so this would work, and this would actually omit the whole filter because this is always true. So it's not really a filter at all. So let's try if this also works on our web app. So this is the URL encoded version of the apostrophe. Let's say or 1 equals 1. And it works. We get all the products back because there's no filter applied, and this would probably be the same as this with all the products. And we can also do the opposite and create a filter that's always false, so there will never be any products returned to the user, by creating something like and2 is 1. And this is never the case, and something, so even though this is the case, and using the AND operator with something that's that is not valid at all, you would create a case where it's never valid. Kind of struggle with the explanation, but let's try. And 1 is 2, or 2 is 1, same thing. Alright, so that works. And now we want to create a union attack and determine the number of columns returned by the query. In order to determine the number of columns, it's easiest to start with order by. And now you will just order by the first column index. So whatever the first column is, you try to order by it, and you will try to increment this by 1 and say, okay, let's try to order by the second column. That works. Let's try to order by the third column. And if that works too, then there are at least 3 columns, and let's try to order by the fourth column, and it doesn't work. So there are just 3 columns available to us. And it could make sense because maybe the first one is this, second one might be this, and the third one might be this, or maybe this is the first one, second one, third one, or in any other order. So we know there are 3 columns, so now we can use the union select technique and select no values. So we try to we try to get all the data from the corporate gifts plus some extra data, in this case 3 null values. And this works. We just append a new row and we have solved the lab. Now what we can also try is to actually put some other data in here. So maybe this is an integer if it's a price maybe, and that's not the price, so maybe this is the product name. Makes sense. So now we've put an A here, and we can try to mess with the price. Maybe this is the price, or maybe this is the price. Let's try 100. So the last one was the price, and this one seems to be the product ID. So now we have found out what columns there are and what the meaning of these columns is in the database, and we have solved the lab.